So it's been a few days since Robert Downey Jr. was announced as Doctor Doom. I'm sure you're still reeling in it. I know I am. But the dust has sort of settled, and now the conversation shifts towards an inevitable question. That question being, of course, what the actual French are they doing? And I totally acknowledge that there is a sect of fans, maybe hardcore fans and casual fans alike, that are very skeptical of this decision. It does sort of feel like a desperate move from Marvel Studios, and it recently just came out in reports that Doctor Doom and RDJ is going to cost Disney well over $80 million. And this broke in an article basically explaining that the Russo brothers are getting $80 million to do both movies. Robert Downey Jr. demanded that the Russos come back, or he wasn't going to play Doctor Doom. And RDJ is making well over $80 million to do the role of Doctor Doom in both films. And that's a crazy amount of money, dude, and they are just going for it, right? Like, this just represents Marvel and kind of doing a crazy multiversal-esque Hail Mary of sorts. And I totally get the skepticism, but in this video, what I really want to focus on is how this could happen. There's basically only 3 options for what they're actually cooking up with RDJ as Dr. Doom. So that's what I want to discuss in this video, and you know we're gonna get real sweaty and real nerdy about it. Now, the first option here is probably the simplest, and that would be that this is actually a Tony Stark variant that becomes Dr. Doom, takes on the name of Victor Von Doom, or maybe was always named Doom. And there have been long-standing rumors that Robert Downey Jr. was going to play some kind of villainous variant of Iron Man. This goes all the way back to Multiverse of Madness, that empty chair in the Illuminati scene. It's when I thought they were going to do Tom Cruise Iron Man, because apparently that was a discussion back then, was Tom Cruise Iron Man as the evil, superior Iron Man variant. And this has happened before. I mean, most notably in Exiles 23 comic from back in the day, where there's an evil variant of Tony Stark that begins taking over the world. He initially works with Doctor Doom and eventually overthrows him, becoming Doctor Doom, but he's really Tony Stark. And so, I mean, when you think about an evil Tony Stark variant and how cool that sounds, like that was something they were cooking up for a while, right? So it just kind of makes sense that this is a scenario in which they would go. There's precedence in the comics, but also remember, Marvel Studios always does stuff a bit different than the comics. I mean, in the comics, Hank Pym creates Ultron, and that's like a thing. Like, they don't really mess with that in comics. It's usually Hank Pym that made Ultron in all the different universes, but in the MCU, they decide to make it Tony Stark because they have RDJ, and that character is so popular, or was so popular. And I think when you look at what they just did with Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, essentially taking the general story of Wolverine that we know from all those other Fox movies and kind of making a twist or a turn with that character's story, I could actually see them doing the same thing with Tony Stark. Like, for instance, perhaps a variant of Tony Stark has the Sokovia thing happen. After that happens, instead of like sort of succumbing to his grief and supporting the government for civil war, what if he begins to dabble in magic? What if he actually becomes Doctor Doom? Like, maybe Tony just completely gives up his identity as Tony Stark, gives up all of his wealth, and goes to just support the people of Sokovia, eventually turning that country in to Latveria. Remember, too, that the Scarlet Witch is from Sokovia, and in a scenario where they want to give a Tony Stark variant a bunch of magical powers, maybe he links up with the Scarlet Witch and begins aiding her in trying to enact vengeance on the Avengers, the people that had wronged her. I mean, there's iconic comic book images of Doctor Doom marrying Wanda Maximoff, right? That's actually from the Children's Crusade run, and it was absolutely nuts. So what if they do something like that with variants? I mean, imagine it, right? A variant of Tony Stark after Sokovia gives up his name, gives up his money and wealth, and then just goes to the people of Sokovia in order to try to help them. All of a sudden, Wanda Maximoff comes there. She initially wants to fight him or something, and then realizes that he's actually there to help. She begins teaching this person that calls himself Victor Von Doom now, and that's how he learns magic and becomes Doctor Doom. Now, as a hardcore Doctor Doom fan, I'm a little iffy on this actually being the way that they do it, because I love Victor Von Doom. His origin is perfect the way that it is. So like, dude, hands off. Like, you don't need him to be a Tony Stark. I also just really hate the idea of Doctor Doom in the mask being all quippy and funny in the way that Tony is. So if it is a Tony Stark variant, it has to be a very serious one that feels very Doctor Doom, right? I have a lot of potential concerns for this being the way that they do it. However, if I'm just using like my logical brain parts, I would have to tell you guys, this is the most likely scenario. This is probably why you pay Robert Downey Jr. money to have a Tony Stark variant that becomes Doctor Doom. It's the most obvious way to do it. But they technically have two more options. I mean, they could do the second option, which is to make Robert Downey Jr. a completely different character, maybe using some prosthetics, maybe like a wig or something, make him look different than Tony Stark, but still like Robert Downey Jr. And I guess this could play in the way that Gemma Chan was a character in the first Captain Marvel movie, and then she goes on to be Cersei in the Eternals movie. And a lot of fans are bringing up the whole thing in Deadpool and Wolverine with Chris Evans. I mean, they literally play on the fact that he's Cap, but he's actually Johnny, and he was quite distinct as Johnny in that movie. Felt like a totally different character than Steve Rogers, despite looking just like him. And so they could potentially do that, right? I mean, Robert Downey Jr. is an Oscar-winning actor. I think he's really freaking talented. He can definitely play just Victor Von Doom. Nothing to do with Tony Stark. But the problem with that is it kind of leaves a lot of flavor on the table. So as much as like the purist in me, the pure Doctor Doom fans, like, no, I just want Victor Von Doom. There's a lot of like just basic movie fun. I mean, just think about the Chris Evans thing. Now, I know that's a joke, right? But it actually plays well in the movie because Deadpool thinks it's Cap at first, and it's kind of interesting, right? Well, I mean, so many people have talked about this, right? If Tom Holland is maybe the anchor being of the 616 universe, or just a big part of the next two Avengers movies, if he sees someone that looks just like Tony Stark, the guy that he loves, he's going to let his guard down. And that's really interesting. It makes for a compelling scene, possibility of that Tony Stark variant whooping up on Spider-Man. It would put a twinge of really bad feelings into the audience. So there's like a lot of movie magic that you miss out on if you just make him totally separate character and you make him look completely different than Tony Stark, right? Like, the purist in me wants it, but you're leaving way too much fun on the table. And I don't think you pay Robert Downey Jr. money to bring him back and not utilize Robert Downey Jr. and his face in the thing. We already have My Time to Shine Hello basically saying online that you're going to see Doctor Doom's face a lot. Now, the third option is the most weird option, but technically a possibility, and I think more likely than the second scenario. I just really don't see them just doing Victor. They could grab any actor in the world to just do Victor Von Doom. I mean, not any actor, but you know what I'm saying. And the third option would be that it's Victor Von Doom in the body of Tony Stark. Now, Rob from Comics Explained just put out an incredible video the Sunday morning after the Robert Downey Jr. announcement. It hit trending. That video's blowing up. It's gonna hit like 1 million views, dude. I had Rob on the stream yesterday. We had an incredible conversation about all of this. But I say all of that to say that this idea is now out there in an incredible capacity, literally thanks to Rob. And he really convinced me that this is something that could happen. So this is from the Demon in the Armor storyline. I'll TLDR it here, but really go watch Rob's video. Incredible breakdown as always. But it's essentially just a scenario in which the college thing that happens between Reed Richards and Doctor Doom is replaced by Reed Richards and Tony Stark. They're the college roommates, or the people that go to college together. And essentially, Victor realizes just what privilege and the resources that Tony Stark has. Even though Tony doesn't take things seriously, he just has so much, right? So Doom basically just pulls a freaking crazy ass Doctor Doom and he body swaps with Tony. He literally takes over Tony Stark's body because of the doors that will open for him with Tony Stark's body, his wealth, his reputation, his fame, and Victor goes on to start to use all of that for himself. Now, there's this whole other side of that story where Tony has his memory wiped and he goes into the body of Doctor Doom, and then he goes to Latveria, and then Tony, as Doctor Doom, he just thinks of himself as Doctor Doom. He goes and does Doctor Doom stuff. Now, he's more philanthropic and a lot nicer than the actual Doctor Doom, but the whole story comes to a head in which Victor, meets up with Tony And Tony, as Doctor Doom in the Doctor Doom body, beats Iron Man and doesn't want his life back. He actually doesn't want to be Stark anymore. He's like, no, that name comes with a whole bunch of problems, man. I'm Doctor Doom now. Doctor Doom is a respected name. I'm keeping this name. And the thing that's crazy about that is, like, I was immediately thinking after the announcement of him taking over Tony's body, because Doom has body swapped multiple times. I mean, he took over the body of Daredevil and went and did all kinds of Daredevil shit just to prove that he could. Doom also has this ability where when his body is destroyed, he can actually save his mind and his being through like magic and shit is literally saved, and he can then put his mind into another body. Kind of similar to Patrick Stewart in the end of X-Men The Last Stand in that post-credit scene, which, by the way, that's technically the first post-credit scene ever in the history of comic book movies, and it's absolute dog shit. But funnily enough, it actually does relate to what we're talking about, because in that post-credit scene, you have this comatose, brain-dead, vegetable twin to Charles Xavier that's just sitting there, and Charles Xavier, who is obliterated by Phoenix in that movie, puts his mind into that body. It's like way too perfect and cheesy and weird, but essentially, like, Professor X can transport his consciousness into a different body. So can Doctor Doom. Doctor Doom has literally done that before in comic. And if we're just talking about like the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the Marvel Cinematic Multiverse, if Doctor Doom realizes that the multiverse is collapsing and he has to take matters into his own hands, there's nothing that would stop him from getting exactly what he needs to do that. And that could potentially even be the body of a Tony Stark variant. I mean, think about it like this. The body of a Tony Stark would unlock all sorts of technology, not just in one universe, but in most universes. Most universes, Tony Stark walks into that universe, there's a whole bunch of stuff there, a whole bunch of toys, weapons, and things that would probably obey his command. You know, it would know that he's an actual Tony Stark, and therefore, like, Jarvis would listen to him, Friday would listen to him, you know, like all the weapons, everything would listen to him. But on top of that, so would other characters. In most universes, Tony Stark's probably a hero, right? So if he presents himself as Stark to the heroes of any particular universe, their guard goes down. They want to believe in him. They might even follow orders, you know, based on the story he would tell them. So I actually do believe that that is a scenario that they could use in this movie. It could be something real crazy they're cooking up because, again, because of the place that Tony Stark holds within the Marvel Cinematic Universe and within the multiverse, having that body or pretending to be that guy is like interesting. That could work for Doom and be a way for him to get more power. And as we've explained in this video, and any self-respecting nerd knows, there's a lot of parallel between Tony Stark and Doctor Doom. I mean, the infamous Iron Man run after Doom comes out of Secret Wars, Reed Richards heals his face, and he wants to kind of be more heroic, and he sort of takes up the mantle of Stark because Stark at that point is dead. That is such an interesting story because it really shows how similar Doctor Doom and Iron Man are. There have been many other stories, like they get sent back to the 1600s in comics together and have to work together. So I know it might be a little shocking to a lot of like more normie comic book fans or just fans of like the movies and stuff, but as a comic book fan, as a super sweaty nerd, trust me, there's a lot of parallel between these characters, and it makes a lot of sense. It makes sense to do this. And we don't know exactly what they're doing, but I personally think the smart money is on option number 1 with a Tony Stark variant that becomes Doctor Doom, or maybe an outside shot at option number 3 where you have a Doom inside the body of a Tony Stark. That might be too weird for, you know, normal audiences. I'm not sure, but I think that's what they're going to do. Again, I would love for them to do option number 2. I want just Victor, and then Victor becomes Victor and takes over the multiverse, but they're bringing RDJ back because he was Iron Man. They're paying RDJ all of that money because fans will be, you know, emotional seeing him back. They're going to be excited and confused and be like, oh, but that's my Tony. Why is it doing the Doctor Doom shit? Anyway, guys, I got a lot more videos, a lot more thoughts on this, as I'm sure you do, so stay tuned to this channel. Stay tuned to the streaming channel. I think tomorrow on stream, we're literally going to watch like 5 hours of Doctor Doom videos together so that we can all become experts. It's going to be super cool, so come on by for that. And as I always say, I hope you are having an awesome and a nerdy day, and I'll see you in the next video.